Imagine if you thought your assets are not good, you're going to want to sell those assets, and that creates this terrible supply-demand balance that produces a great conflict. Now, the central bank can either let that happen, interest rates rise, asset goes down, economies suffer, or they come in and they print a lot of money. At the end of the day, they print a lot of money, and as a result, you have a monetary inflation type of situation. That's the situation we're in. We're in that situation. It is so critical in terms of the supply and demand. When I calculate the supply and demand over the next year and 3 years, we have an immediate issue.
Bridgewater Associates founder and veteran macro investor Ray Dalio has issued a fresh warning about the U.S. economy. Ray Dalio warns of severe consequences for the American people in 1 to 3 years if the country's massive $36.4 trillion national debt is not significantly reduced. Ray Dalio's main recommendation for achieving this and stopping a debt spiral is for the U.S. budget deficit to be reduced from 7.5% to 3% of GDP. The hedge fund titan warns that this is the only way to stop the coming debt spiral, which he says will lead to higher interest costs, a weakened bond market, further devaluation of the U.S. dollar, economic stagnation or recession, social and political instability, and above all, the loss of the dollar's reserve currency status. To mitigate the risk of a debt crisis, Ray Dalio advocates for policymakers to implement measures such as reducing spending, lowering taxes, and cutting interest rates to manage the fiscal deficit effectively. He suggests that stabilizing the economy requires reducing the U.S. deficit to 3% of GDP. For investors, Ray Dalio recommends diversifying portfolios, avoiding government and corporate bonds, and considering investments in AI-related companies and countries with stable economic fundamentals. He issued these warnings and stressed the importance of taking action immediately while speaking with Tucker Carlson at the World Government Summit in Dubai. While stressing that most of the developed world faces the same problem, Ray Dalio warns that the U.S. is in a more dire situation as the global superpower and the issuer of the world's reserve currency. During the discussion with Carlson, Ray Dalio linked his forecast for the U.S. economy to historical trends based on 5 major cycles: money debt markets, internal order, natural disasters, technological shifts, and great power conflicts. As we present clips from the discussion, please watch, share, and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications bell for more videos. We appreciate the support and hope you enjoy the video.
As a global macro investor for like 50 years, I found that some of the times I was surprised was because of things that happened that didn't happen in my lifetime before, so I needed to go back and study history. And in studying that history, that helped me a lot. And there are 5 major forces that operate in a big cycle, and those together they operate in that big cycle. And those 5 forces are: first, there is the money, debt, markets, economy force, and we now have a debt issue, a big debt issue globally that is very important. That's a force, that financial force. The second force is the internal order and disorder force that goes in a cycle in which there is then greater and greater gaps and conflict between the left and the right, and populism that forces a great conflict like a civil war, which I believe we are in a form of civil war now that's going on within countries. The third is the great world power conflict, that when a great power runs the world order and then there's a rising power that challenges that, you have a great power conflict, US-China. Number 4 is, throughout history, is acts of nature. Droughts, floods, and pandemics have killed more people than wars and have toppled more orders than anything else. And now we have climate and the acts of nature, which are a big force. And the 5th big force, all through man's history, is man's inventiveness, particularly of technologies. And that everything that we talk about, everything that we are looking at falls under one of those, and they move in a largely cyclical way, and that is the framework that we now are living out. The way the debt cycle works is think of credit and our credit system as being like a circulatory system. That credit brings buying power, brings nutrients to all of the system. But that credit that we buy things with, we buy financial assets, we buy goods and services with, creates debt. And that debt accumulates like plaque in a system that begins to have a problem because it starts to squeeze out spending. For example, the US budget, about $1 trillion a year now goes to pay interest rates. And over the next year, we're going to have over $9 trillion of debt that we have to pay back and roll forward, hopefully. So there's a supply-demand issue with this debt. One man's debts are another man's assets. And if those assets do not provide an adequate return, or they feel that there is risk in those assets, there's not enough demand for that debt, there is a problem. And that problem is that interest rates then start to rise, and those holders of the debt begin to realize there's a debt problem, and worse on this supply demand is that they have to sell the debt. Imagine if you thought your assets are not good, you're going to want to sell those assets, and that creates this terrible supply-demand balance that produces a great conflict. Now, the central bank can either let that happen, interest rates rise, asset goes down, economies suffer, or they come in and they print a lot of money. At the end of the day, they print a lot of money, and as a result, you have a monetary inflation type of situation. That's the situation we're in. We're in that situation. It is so critical in terms of the supply and demand. When I calculate the supply and demand over the next year and 3 years, we have an immediate issue.
In the next 3 years?
Yes.
Can you be more specific about what that issue is? Like, what does that look like if not addressed in the next 3 years?
It looks like the holders of the debt and the buyers of the debt will not buy enough to meet the supply, and as a result, interest rates will rise. As those interest rates rise, that has an effect, of course, on the economy and so on, but it begins real problems, particularly when asset prices are now fairly expensive, and so you have that dynamic taking place. The central bank then is put into a position. Does it print money and buy that shortfall? And when it does that, then there is the depreciation of the value of money that produces a monetary inflation. In any case, there is a movement from this treasury market, which is the backbone of our whole financial system, to be, there is a trauma in that, and then that affects all markets, and then money as a storehold of wealth as we know it is in jeopardy. Is not in jeopardy, it's depreciated. So there's an issue of debt is money, money is debt. And if you have a supply-demand problem, and it's not good to hold that asset, you're going to have the selling of that asset, and you're going to have that kind of spiral. And we needn't do this. Okay, it's alert, but the existing, I'll speak of the United States, but a number of countries face this issue. The United States will run a deficit of about 7.5% of GDP if the Trump tax cuts are continued, which I expect. And that deficit needs to be cut to 3% of GDP, must be cut to 3% of GDP. All policymakers and the president should have a pledge to get it to 3% of GDP, because otherwise we're likely to have a problem. And that can be done.
The Donald Trump administration is actively pursuing a broad strategy to reduce government spending by restructuring federal agencies, cutting social programs, and shifting fiscal priorities. A major component of this effort is the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, which is systematically identifying and eliminating redundancies across federal operations. Through DOGE, the administration is aggressively downsizing agencies, with one of the most significant examples being the dramatic reduction of the United States Agency for International Development, USAID workforce, shrinking it from over 10,000 employees to approximately 290. This move is primarily aimed at curtailing foreign aid expenditures, which the administration perceives as an unnecessary financial burden that does not directly benefit American citizens. Simultaneously, officials are working to restructure federal entitlement programs, proposing reductions in Medicaid, Medicare, and other welfare programs. They argue that these changes are necessary to address unsustainable government spending. Another key area of focus is the Department of Education, which the administration is exploring options to dismantle, transferring its functions to state governments as part of a broader push to reduce federal oversight and administrative costs. The administration is also trying to lower borrowing costs by implementing policies designed to bring down Treasury yields. By shifting the government's debt structure toward short-term securities and promoting deficit reduction strategies, officials believe they can ease the financial burden on the federal budget. Ray Dalio recognizes the importance of these efforts and suggests further actions that can help immediately lower the budget deficit and stabilize the U.S. economy.
There are many ways to get the number down to 3% of GDP. So you've got to have, and there's a lot of politics about that.
Well, yeah.
But everybody should say, whatever way you get there, you've got to get there, okay? So now the question is, are the cost cuts going to actually be able to produce that? You have to take sharp pencils. And you also have to think, what are you going to break along the way? Because you don't want to break too many things along the way, but you've got to do it fast. So, how much is cost cuts? How much is interest rates? Interest rates are an important influence on the debt because we're paying so much in interest rates. So how do you affect the interest rates? If you do this, you'll improve the supply-demand picture and you'll have lower interest rates, which will contribute. So I think you have to say, you have to deliver. How much can you deliver from each of those things without breaking too many things that are going to be problematic? And we can go down, if I was then having that conversation, you can go back to the items. Don't let the ideological aspects of this be so much that you don't achieve the goal. There is truth in the fact that new technologies are going to bring about efficiency. We make increases in income and increases in productivity. There are benefits to be had from those things too.
Yes.
Okay? But there is an unknown factor there, and it looks to me like each one of those having enough effect in a quick enough period of time is unlikely, or if you want to do it, I would say, then recognize that you're responsible for the consequences. And if you don't pull this off and there's a problem, that you own it.
Is it scarier to you, the debt crisis that you described that's right on the horizon, or the potential blowback from making cuts that, the population really doesn't want?
I think the question is how tolerable it is. I think we are at this big risk thing, and a lot of decisions have got to be made quick.
Yes.
And so you've got to go ahead and be right and make those decisions, and then you find out what's tolerable. I think that probably, since achieving that must be of paramount importance, then you do it, and that's the best thing that you can do.
Make the decision.
And go do it. Get the 3%. And you can do it if you realize there are three factors. There's taxes, which I say taxes, not tax rates, tax income, which also comes from it.
Of course.
From the fact that if the world is earning more, there will be more tax income. Okay, so there's taxes. There's spending. Cut the spending in various ways. Cut it down as far as you can, and that becomes tolerable. And then there's interest rates. And if you do the first two, you will have lower interest rates. This magnitude of change, which is roughly a 4 to 5% change in GDP, a fiscal tightening of 4 or 5% in GDP, happened between 1992 and 1998.
Right.
So it's been doable. If you get that mix right, you don't create too much shock in any one of those, it's achievable. But it has to be done now. Since 1944, there was a healthy period where debt taken on produced enough income to service the debt.
Right.
That's good. That's healthy.
Yes.
That's not a problem. Everybody benefits from that. Then we got into a period of time through these various cycles that more debt got taken on than incomes. And so when you need income to service the debt. And so that rose for a long time. And the crescendo of that took place in the two big fiscal stimulations that took place first in the COVID and second in what was a big transfer of wealth where the government borrowed a lot of money, send out checks, and then we had the rise in inflation. Oh, surprise, you send out all these checks.
You weren't surprised?
Of course not. You send out all this money to everybody, what are you going to...
The Treasury Secretary seemed completely shocked by it. Like, really?
Where we are in that spot. And that's not just the U.S., okay? That's the world.
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm talking about is that it's a world problem, it's a China problem, it's a Europe problem, it's a world debt problem. But I want to go back to my OSO 5. That means it's an internal political problem. Okay, because if you have that problem, that debt problem, you exacerbate the great conflict that's going to happen.
Yes.
You create political instability. It's a geopolitical problem, a debt situation at the same time as there are conflicts internationally, geopolitical.
Ray Dalio has extensively analyzed the patterns of rising and declining empires, applying these insights to assess the current state of the United States. In his book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, How and Why Nations Succeed and Fail, Ray Dalio outlines several key principles regarding the decline of empires, particularly focusing on the U.S. These factors include mounting debt and economic challenges, widening wealth and income gap, diminished global influence, and internal discord and political fragmentation. Ray Dalio emphasizes that the rise and fall of empires follow cyclical patterns and notes that empires typically experience phases of growth, stability, and decline. The U.S., according to Ray Dalio, is exhibiting characteristics consistent with the late stages of this cycle, including economic challenges, social unrest, and geopolitical competition. The convergence of these factors may lead to significant domestic and international upheaval. Ray Dalio warns that if current trends persist, the U.S. could face severe economic downturns, increased internal conflicts, and a diminished role on the world stage. He estimates a notable probability of major internal strife within the next several years if these issues are not addressed. However, he believes economic reforms, addressing income inequality, and strengthening international relations, amongst other things, could give the U.S. empire more time before it has to share or completely hand over the throne. As Ray Dalio warns, history moves in cycles, and the signs of economic decline are becoming harder to ignore. From rising debt to increasing social and political tensions, the U.S. is facing challenges that could redefine its position on the world stage. But the real question is, what happens next? Will policymakers course correct, or are we headed for a major financial shift? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Are we witnessing the decline of an empire, or is this just another phase in the economic cycle? If you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more deep dives on finance and global trends, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.